Welcome to Phase 2 of the MCU lookbacks, and Phase 2 of the MCU in general. It's been a lot of fun talking about these movies so far. I had a great time covering Phase 1. You can check out those videos now on my channel. Going into Phase 2, though, this is a movie that has come up a few times in comments from people, because I guess this one was an anticipated video. Iron Man 3 is one of those debated movies pretty hotly in the MCU. It still gets talked about to this day. There are decisions that it made that were very interesting, and some people liked them, some did not. But before we get to all of that stuff, obviously, this was a movie that had a ton of hype surrounding it. I remember at the end of the Avengers, just thinking, wow, that was awesome. I can't wait to see what else is going to happen with these characters. And then a year later, going in to see Iron Man 3, you have to remember the hype for this was through the roof. Especially after seeing the trailers for Iron Man 3 that seemed to show Tony's house being blown up, the Mandarin, and it seemed like he was in a position where things could go really, really wrong for him, that he might not be able to make it out of this particular adventure. And so all of those ideas, thoughts, and speculations were really ramping up as the movie was about to come out, and then eventually going and seeing the movie was a very fascinating experience because it subverted a lot of expectations and it did things that were incredibly fascinating. In the pantheon of the MCU, I would say Iron Man 3 is one of those very unique efforts, not just because of the things that it does with its story, but also in terms of its characterization when it comes to Tony Stark. Something about these three movies, the Iron Man trilogy that exists, is that they all sort of act as really good steps towards making Tony Stark somebody else. In this sense, being a better man, perhaps. Because the first two movies, yes, he went through his moments of humility, and there are mistakes that he made, and eventually he, worked his way out of those mistakes. But it's something that he seemed to have a lock on pretty often. Like, even when he was trapped in the cave in Gulmira, it's like, yes, there's a desperation moment early on, but once the cogs are turning in his head, he knows what to do. In Iron Man 2, same thing. He is faced with a mortality situation. He is dying because of the palladium, but he figures a way out and eventually, he manages to save the day once again. But the thing that I really like about Iron Man 3 is that it sort of brings him down to earth with the idea that this is a man who can also feel something. Like, eventually, those cracks are going to start to show. And in this case, it's in the form of anxiety attacks. He is clearly traumatized by the events of the Avengers. If nothing else, that humbled him more so than anything else, because it's sort of this realization of how big things are. Because it suddenly makes you realize that everything that you've done up until this point might not be enough. And it might not be enough to protect people that you love. At this point of time, he is madly in love with Pepper. She is the one for him. And so that particular aspect of it as well is playing into the decisions that he's making. He's barely sleeping. He's constantly working on new armors. He's trying to do innovative things with them. And that's sort of driving him to a point of no return. And something that even Rhodey mentions is like, people are concerned about you. And then eventually, whenever New York is brought up, you can see that he's starting to, have that feeling of anxiety, of panic, of what else could happen. And so that's something that is constantly playing on his mind, is even when the Mandarin attacks, because it's something that he feels unprepared for. He thinks he's still got the cocky version of himself in him. Like, yeah, of course, come on over to my house, front door, I'll leave it unlocked. Like, he gives his address on national television after the Chinese theater attack. And when that happens, you're thinking, yep, that's Tony Stark. He's going to be ready to go. But they eventually do show up, blow up the mansion, and he's in the Mark 42 prototype armor, which is not really working. And so for a long time in the movie, he's not really, left to his devices because he doesn't have any devices. And so to have him figure his way out of things and to, reconcile with his past and make way for a better future is one of the highlights of the movie for me, and I think they handled that really, really well. These are some things that are also brought together with character interactions that he has, in particular with Harley, this kid that he meets in Tennessee when the mansion gets blown up. He eventually shows up in town, and he's talking with this kid after being in his shed, and then eventually going around town trying to find out about why there's these suspected bombings that are happening with, veteran soldiers. I like the back and forth between Tony and Harley, and that was easily a dynamic that, really did stand the test of time as it went on. There are things that are said in those moments that really do have an impact later on as well. But it also is juxtaposed with the bad interactions that he's had. So as the movie opens, he meets Aldrich Killian, played by Guy Pearce. And he's someone who has some great ideas when it comes to tech and wants to talk to Tony about it, but Tony ghosts him. And eventually he ends up, creating his own thing with advanced idea mechanics, and he's created something called Extremis. And Extremis is what's being sort of injected into these, soldiers, into people to, cause these terrorist attacks that are happening. And that's where the Mandarin comes in, played by Ben Kingsley, or Trevor Slattery, as you get to know him. I guess we may as well talk about this now. So he's not the Mandarin. If you've seen the future of the MCU, then you know who the Mandarin really is, and you've seen that story play out. In this one, he's sort of a placeholder. He's using the image of that character of the 10 Rings, and Aldrich has sort of been running that from behind the scenes with these incredibly terrifying videos on television that are, threatening the President of the United States and that are, causing a lot more harm, and that is increasing the tension that is within Tony as a result, especially because one of those bombings gets Happy very critically injured and puts them in the hospital for a bit. And so again, it's just all of those things building together, but the reveal of the fact that the Mandarin is actually an actor, obviously that's something that not everybody liked. It led to a very divided response. Some people liked that twist, some did not. I can't help but feel like I should say right now, I laughed when that happened, because it just felt like the most unexpected thing. I was like, yeah, okay, I mean, that's really funny. Eventually, there has been a sort of reclamation of this arc, and eventually, the outcome of it in the future, I have absolutely no issues. I think they brought it around nicely down the line. But it doesn't downplay the threat of Killian yet, because he's still very much out to get Tony. The motivation is a bit stretched. Just the idea of this one meeting not happening and then eventually him becoming what he does is a thing. But at the same time, he plays the villain very well, and I liked Guy Pearce in the movie. I thought he did a very good job. Quick side note over here, Maya, played by Rebecca Hall, who is first with Tony at the start of the movie, and then eventually she shows up again in Tony's life when Killian is making the moves that he is. I really like Rebecca Hall. She's not in the movie that much, so that's disappointing. But yeah, it was cool seeing her in this movie. She gets killed, though, by Killian eventually. It's sad when she died. Anyway, going back to Killian. Eventually, though, Tony having to deal with the extremist army that Killian has cultivated alongside Rhodey, who is now the Iron Patriot, which is something that he says is tested well with focus groups, even though it's very quickly reversed in the future. That's not something that stays. But I did like that aspect of it too. It also led to my favorite scene of the entire movie, which is this incredible action sequence where Air Force One is attacked and Tony has to save a lot of the staffers on board who are falling to their deaths. That entire rescue sequence as they're all plummeting to their deaths, thousands of feet, excellent stuff. That was a highlight of the movie, and it's a brilliant sequence, and it's still one of the more tense sequences in the entire MCU, eventually leading to that bonkers third act where the entire Hall of Armor shows up from deep within the wreckage of the mansion to fight all of the extremist soldiers. That was a lot of fun. It also led to something that eventually, outside of the movie, there was a mobile game that came out for Iron Man 3. It was sort of like a temple run style thing, but I had so much fun playing that game, and there was a point where I was so addicted to it, I would keep playing and keep accumulating points so that I could get new suits, and I was pretty good at it. I got a bunch of suits. I don't know if I got every single one of them, but I came pretty close. I think at some point in time I had to drop the game and do this thing called studying for school to be a good student. some boring shit like that. And then, of course, as the movie comes to an end, the big final battle between Tony and Killian, Pepper getting extremis of her own and killing Killian in the process, and then Tony making the decision to let go of all of his suits. He's like, forget all this, let's just start a life together, and let's just, have a peaceful time where it's just you and me, and we need this. Like, he finds that priority that he really, has to take care of the things that he loves and the things that he cares about. And so I like the fact that the movie does bring that concept around once again. These anxieties are built on wanting to be there for the people that he loves. And so just to have, be able to find that sort of full circle moment when it comes to the ending of Iron Man 3. I thought it did a great job with that. Brian Tyler's score in this movie is great. I talked about this in Iron Man 1's retrospective, but I thought Ramin Djawadi did a great job over there. But I think Brian Tyler might be my favorite of the 3 scores. Excellent stuff. I love listening to it every now and then. I just randomly play it. That Stark theme in particular is really, really awesome. And yeah, I just have a good time with Iron Man 3 in general. It is not my favorite MCU movie by many means, but I do enjoy it quite a bit. Like, I actually do have a lot of appreciation for this movie. Also, it's a Christmas movie, and we are around the corner from that, so Merry Christmas, a very early Merry Christmas at that. So I know this is a contentious movie. I know there's going to be a lot of opinions on the table about it. So I'm very curious to hear what others have to say about it. And so I look forward to those thoughts in the comments down below. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very soon. I'm going to talk about Thor: The Dark World very soon. I have a lot of thoughts on that one. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.